They didn't drop bombs. Not the kind you can see. But when I woke up this morning, 3 of our government servers were offline. The state bank's transfer systems were frozen. Our energy grid flickered, just long enough to send a warning. I've worn this uniform long enough to recognize an attack. What I saw today was warfare. Silent, digital, cowardly, but warfare all the same. A secure report landed on my desk before dawn. A coordinated breach traced back to Tel Aviv, routed through proxies in Nigeria, Romania, even South Africa. The targets: government communications, oil contracts, surveillance satellites. No core systems lost, but the message was clear: retaliation. And for what? Because I told the truth. Because I rejected the money. Because I dared to speak the word they fear most. But the real blow didn't come from the breach. It came when my allies fell silent. 3 African presidents I spoke with just last week about cutting Israeli contracts, suddenly unreachable. One canceled a summit. Another pulled out of an infrastructure deal. The third praised Israel's long-standing partnership with Africa. That's when I understood. They weren't just striking my systems. They were isolating me, branding me reckless, casting Burkina Faso as unstable. So let me say this clearly: we are not unstable. We are unbought. And that is why they fear us. This isn't about contracts, it's about control. They embedded spyware in our telecoms. They leased drones that mapped our gold fields. They trained our officers, then used those same officers to spy on us. And when we said enough, they activated the system they had been building for years. We call it Operation ArcNet. A web of influence spun across Africa. From the Sahel to South Africa, from telecom towers to microloans. Their strategy was simple: control infrastructure, and you control nations. But in Burkina Faso, they failed. Then came the message: back-channel encrypted. Captain Traoré is advised to reconsider. The stability of Burkina Faso is not in his hands alone. We protect friends, or we destabilize fools. I didn't flinch. Here's my answer to Netanyahu: if your definition of stability is submission, then let it burn. We are not your fools. We are not your clients. We are not your colony. And then, 6 hours later, the media strike began. CNN International: Burkina Faso's erratic leadership threatens regional stability. BBC Africa: concerns grow over Captain Traoré's isolated stance. France 24: experts warn of extremist infiltration in Burkina Faso's government. 3 outlets. Same day. Same narrative. Coincidence? No. This is information warfare at its most sophisticated. Plant the story, amplify the message, cite each other as sources. And by evening, the world believes Burkina Faso is unstable. My communications director brought me the overnight analysis. Sir, this isn't just cyber warfare. They're waging economic warfare, destroying our reputation, making us untouchable to new partners. That's when I saw the full picture. This wasn't about punishing one leader. This was a warning to the whole continent. This is what happens when you say no to us. But here's what they didn't expect. I didn't call to apologize. I didn't beg for stability. I didn't bow. I chose another path. I called a press conference that afternoon. Standing before the cameras, I delivered my message clearly. To those who believe they can destabilize my country through digital strikes and media manipulation, you have miscalculated. You have forgotten something fundamental about African people. We do not break. We do not bow. And we will never beg for forgiveness when we refuse to be your slaves. The word spread across international news within minutes. But something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual diplomatic walkbacks, instead of African leaders distancing themselves, I began receiving calls. Quiet calls. Secure channels. Mali's President Ibrahim: we see what they're doing to you. It could be any of us next. Niger's leader: our telecom contracts with Israeli companies are suddenly under review for security concerns. Chad's president: they tried the same pressure on us last month when we questioned their mining agreements. It became clear. Their attack on Burkina Faso was exposing the entire system of control they had built across the Sahel. Other leaders were beginning to realize they had been feeding from a table where they themselves were the meal. By the third day, the tide began to turn. Ghana announced a comprehensive review of all foreign technology partnerships for national security reasons. Tanzania declared that all agricultural drone data collected by foreign companies would now fall under government oversight. Kenya quietly began renegotiating infrastructure contracts, inserting clauses designed to curb foreign surveillance capabilities. The digital strike against Burkina Faso was backfiring. Instead of isolating us, it was awakening the continent. But Netanyahu's operatives weren't finished. On the fourth day, they escalated. Our ambassador to France received an unofficial visit from Mossad agents. They never threatened him directly. Instead, they laid photographs on the table. His daughter at university in London, his wife shopping in Ouagadougou, his elderly father at morning prayers. We hope Captain Traore's family remains safe in these uncertain times, they said before walking away. When my ambassador reported this, I felt something I had not experienced since my early days fighting jihadists in the north. Pure cold rage. They had crossed a line that should never be crossed. They had brought families into this. That night, I did not sleep. I walked the halls of my compound, thinking of every leader who had been removed once they became inconvenient. Gaddafi in Libya, Sankara here in Burkina Faso, Lumumba in Congo. The pattern was always the same: first isolation, then destabilization, then elimination. But I also thought of something else, of the millions of Africans who were tired of being told their resources belonged to others, of the young people who deserved to inherit nations that commanded their own destiny, of my grandfather's hands, scarred and stained by soil he tilled but never owned. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called an emergency session of the Economic Community of West African States. Not through the usual bureaucratic channels. I called each president directly, inviting them personally to an urgent consultation on regional security threats. Within 48 hours, 14 heads of state gathered in Ouagadougou. In that conference room, I laid out everything: the cyberattacks, the economic pressure, the media coordination, the threats against families, the full scope of Operation ArcNet. Brothers, I said, what happened to Burkina Faso this week is a preview of what they will do to any of us who dare to step out of line. The question is simple: do we accept this new form of colonialism, or do we respond as one? The debate raged for 7 hours. Some argued for diplomacy, others feared economic retaliation. A few insisted these were isolated incidents, not a coordinated campaign. Then Chad's president rose. Last month, he said, when we challenged their mining contracts, 3 of our major infrastructure projects suddenly faced financing delays. When we asked why, we were told our credit rating was under review due to political instability. That same week, as the discussion deepened, Nigeria's representative spoke up. The year we began questioning Israeli contracts, our telecom minister was approached by their embassy. They offered to upgrade our communications security for free. When we declined and chose local alternatives, suddenly our satellite uplinks began experiencing mysterious technical difficulties. Ghana's president added his story. They offered to train our cybersecurity teams. When we said we preferred to develop our own capabilities, 2 of our brightest IT specialists were suddenly offered jobs in Israel at 10 times their government salaries. One by one, the pattern emerged. Country after country had faced pressure, bribes, or subtle retaliation whenever they asserted independence in technology, resources, or security. What once looked like isolated incidents was revealed as part of a coordinated continental strategy. By evening, we had our answer. 14 African nations agreed to something not seen since the first days of independence: a united response to foreign interference. The next morning, we announced the African Digital Sovereignty Initiative, a pact committing nations to build independent technological capabilities, joint cybersecurity protocols, shared intelligence on interference operations, and above all, mutual support for any member nation facing digital or economic retaliation for defending its sovereignty. The Western media reaction was immediate and predictable. African leaders embraced dangerous isolationism. Experts warn of authoritarian drift in West Africa. Security concerns grow as African nations reject international partnerships. But this time, something was different. Instead of rushing to reassure Western outlets, our leaders remained silent. They let the criticism wash over them, and they kept building. Within a month, the African Development Bank launched a new fund for indigenous technology development. The African Union upgraded its cybersecurity division into a full directorate. Universities across the continent formed partnerships to reduce reliance on Western training programs. Israel struck back predictably. Diplomatic leaks accused our governments of Iranian infiltration. Think tanks warned of Chinese manipulation. Academic papers argued Africans lacked the capacity for true digital independence. But the momentum was irreversible, because we had done something that changed the entire equation. We had called their bluff. For decades, the threat of isolation had kept African leaders obedient. The fear of losing Western markets, Western technology, Western approval. But when 14 nations stood together and said, "Then isolate all of us," the threat lost its teeth. You cannot isolate half a continent without isolating yourself. 6 months later, another encrypted message arrived. This time, not a threat, but a request. Senior Israeli officials wanted a meeting. They suggested a neutral venue, Switzerland perhaps, or a quiet African capital, far from media glare. I showed the message to my Security Council. My defense minister asked, "What do you think they want?" For the first time in months, I smiled. They want to negotiate. They want to know what it will take for us to stop the continental awakening they accidentally unleashed. And what will I tell them? The same thing I told Trump. The same thing I told Netanyahu's envoy. The same thing I will tell the world until it is heard. We are not your colony. We are not your clients. We are not for sale. But I also chose to add something new. Something they needed to understand about the Africa we were building. If you want to do business with us, you do it as equals. You bring technology sharing, not just technology selling. You offer genuine partnerships, not profit extraction. And above all, you respect that African resources belong to African people. The meeting they proposed never happened. Instead, we began receiving different kinds of communications. Trade delegations asking about partnerships built on mutual benefit. Technology companies offering knowledge transfer programs alongside their contracts. Investment funds proposing joint ventures with African ownership requirements. The language shifted. The tone changed. Because the balance of power had changed. Africa, if you are listening, don't wait until they come for your soil. Don't wait until your president disappears under suspicious circumstances. Don't wait until your internet goes dark and they blame technical issues. What happened in Burkina Faso was a test. They wanted to see how much sovereignty we could stomach. Could we endure the price of saying no? Could we survive without their money? Could we protect ourselves without their satellites? My answer is yes, because we were never weak. We were only deceived. Our weakness was engineered. Our dependency was scripted. But now we are rewriting the script. Mark this date, August 28, 2025. The day Netanyahu's shadow network struck at my country. The day they tried to break our will without firing a single bullet. But also the day we refused to kneel. The day we exposed their strike for what it was, colonialism reborn in digital skin. But here is the date that matters more, December 15, 2025. The day the African Digital Sovereignty Initiative launched its first continental cybersecurity exercise. 22 African nations participated. Together, we simulated coordinated attacks on infrastructure, communications, and financial systems. We tested whether we could maintain essential services without foreign technical support. The results surprised even us. Not only could we protect ourselves, we could protect each other. When one nation's defenses were overwhelmed, neighboring states provided instant technical support. When economic pressure was applied to a member, others stepped in with alternative trade arrangements. We had built something they never expected: African interdependence instead of Western dependence. Today, when Israeli technology firms approach African governments, they don't come with ultimatums. They come with proposals. They offer technology transfer agreements. They suggest joint research initiatives. They propose profit-sharing arrangements. The same companies that once demanded exclusive control of our communications infrastructure now compete for partnerships where African engineers stand alongside their technicians, where African universities gain real technology exchange, where African nations maintain full sovereignty over their digital infrastructure. This is what happens when you stop begging and start bargaining. When you stop accepting and start negotiating. When you finally understand that you hold something they need far more than they hold anything you need. They need our markets. They need our resources. They need our cooperation. But we do not need their domination. We do not need their surveillance. We do not need their control. What we need is partnership. Real partnership. The kind where both sides benefit. The kind built on respect. The kind where no one has to kneel. The cyberattack on Burkina Faso 6 months ago was meant to teach us the cost of defiance. Instead, it taught us the power of solidarity. When one African nation stands alone, they can isolate it, pressure it, destabilize it. But when 22 African nations stand together, building alternatives, defending one another, the entire equation changes. You cannot destabilize a continent. You cannot isolate half of Africa. You cannot cyberattack your way into controlling 1 billion people who have decided they are done being controlled. Let it be known, we are not frightened. We are forged, not by their attacks, but by our responses. Not by their threats, but by our unity. Not by their power, but by our refusal to bow. The morning they tried to break us was the morning we discovered we could not be broken. The day they thought they would teach us fear was the day we realized we had nothing left to fear. Because when you have nothing left to lose, you discover you have everything to gain. When you stop trying to please those who will never respect you, you begin building relationships with those who will. When you stop begging for scraps from their table, you start growing your own food. That is the lesson of August 28, 2025. Not simply that digital warfare is the new colonialism. We already knew that. The lesson is that digital solidarity is the new independence. That African unity is not just a dream from the 1960s, it is a necessity for the 2020s. That sovereignty is not something you ask for, it is something you take. The servers they attacked that morning are stronger now. The systems they tried to infiltrate are more secure. The country they sought to destabilize is more stable. And the continent they tried to divide is more united. We learned something that morning they never wanted us to learn. We don't need them nearly as much as they need us. And once you understand that truth, everything changes. The balance of power, the terms of engagement, the future of the relationship. They didn't drop bombs that morning. They dropped something else, the mask, the pretense, the illusion that their domination was inevitable, their control permanent, their power unbreakable. What they revealed instead was their fear that the old ways of controlling Africa were dying, and they did not know how to build new relationships based on equality and respect. That morning they showed us their weakness, and we showed them our strength, not the strength to destroy, but the strength to build, not the strength to attack, but the strength to defend, not the strength to dominate, but the strength to be free. So I tell you, mark the date, remember the lesson, share the story, because what happened in Burkina Faso was never just about one country, one attack, or one response. It was about the future of an entire continent, the future of African independence in the digital age, the future of relationships built on respect rather than exploitation. And that future is now. That future is us. That future is what we are building every single day. We choose dignity over dependence, sovereignty over submission, solidarity over isolation. Country or death, we have made our choice. The question is, have you made yours? But let me tell you what the headlines did not show, what the think tanks never captured. The real transformation that began when we refused to bend. 3 months after that press conference, I received an unexpected visitor. Not a diplomat, not an envoy, a young woman, maybe 25, carrying only a laptop, speaking perfect French with a faint accent I couldn't place. "Captain Traore," she said softly. "My name is Sarah. I'm a software engineer from Tel Aviv, and I am here to apologize. I studied her carefully. No security escort, no official credentials, just a young woman with tired eyes and a story she needed to tell. I helped build some of the systems they used against you. She confessed. The backdoors in the telecom equipment. The vulnerabilities in the banking software. I was told it was for counterterrorism, to help protect African nations from cyber threats. I believed them. She opened her laptop and showed me lines of code, hidden protocols, technical documentation, evidence that confirmed everything we had long suspected but could never prove. When I saw what happened to your country, when I read your speech about digital colonialism, I realized what I had truly built. She continued. Not systems of protection, systems of control, not tools of security, tools of surveillance. She stayed with us for 3 days. She trained my technical team, revealed vulnerabilities we hadn't even known existed, taught us countermeasures that unraveled years of embedded surveillance. On the last day, I asked her, why? Why help us? She lowered her gaze, and her voice trembled. Because my grandfather survived the Holocaust hiding in the forests, sheltered by people who promised never again. Now I see my own government doing to others what was once done to us. Creating digital ghettos, building electronic walls, using technology to control and isolate entire populations. She paused, her gaze drifting toward the Ouagadougou skyline. My grandfather would be ashamed of what Israel has become. I choose to remember what it was meant to be. A refuge where the oppressed would never become oppressors. When she left, I realized something profound. The attacks on Burkina Faso had sparked more than African solidarity. They had awakened consciences across the world, engineers refusing to build surveillance systems, programmers leaking vulnerability reports to targeted nations, tech workers choosing ethics over paychecks. Within 6 months, unexpected allies began reaching out. Former NSA contractors disillusioned by America's cyber imperialism, European hackers who saw digital sovereignty as a basic human right, Asian programmers who knew the sting of technological colonization. The African Digital Sovereignty Initiative evolved into something greater than a defensive pact. It became a beacon for all who believed technology should liberate, not enslave. By the end of the year, we had achieved what many thought impossible. An alternative internet independent of the fiber, optic cables snaking through London, New York, and Tel Aviv. Our own satellites, our own data centers, our own protocols. For the first time in the digital era, Africa could communicate with itself without foreign oversight. Nigerian banks transferred funds to Kenyan businesses without American approval. Ethiopian researchers shared data with South African universities without European monitoring. The technical achievement was historic, but the psychological transformation was revolutionary. Young Africans abandoned WhatsApp for Afrit, an encrypted messaging platform built by African engineers, hosted on African servers and protected by African privacy laws. Instead of feeding Facebook's algorithms, they connected on Ubuntu Social, a network designed for community, not addiction. Governments migrated their most sensitive data from Amazon Web Services to the Continental Cloud Consortium, powered by African renewables, staffed by African technicians, and guarded by African cybersecurity protocols. The economics spoke for themselves. Billions that once flowed to foreign tech giants now fueled local industries. Supply chains, once cut short at the level of raw material exports, now stretched from mining to manufacturing to software development. But the greatest shift was in the mind. For the first time in living memory, young Africans looked at their devices and saw their own reflection. Innovation that was theirs, platforms that embodied their values, systems that served their interests. The moment I knew we had truly succeeded came when my 15-year-old nephew asked me something unthinkable just 2 years before. Uncle, why do Americans still use such outdated technology? Their internet is so slow compared to ours, and their privacy laws are terrible. Why haven't they upgraded to African standards yet? That single question. A young African pitting America's technological backwardness marked a revolution generations in the making. We had not only achieved independence, We had achieved superiority. The global response was predictable. Western think tanks churned out alarmed reports about African technological nationalism. Intelligence agencies warned of digital balkanization and the dangerous precedent of regional internet systems. Tech executives testified before Congress, insisting Africa's actions threaten global connectivity. But there was something they couldn't undo: the demonstration effect. If Africans could build technology that was faster, safer, and more ethical than Silicon Valley's, then what did that say about American supremacy? Other regions took notice. Latin American countries began constructing interregional networks. Southeast Asian nations launched their own social platforms. European privacy advocates pushed harder for independence from U.S. surveillance capitalism. The digital world was decolonizing. The irony was sharp. The cyberattacks meant to keep Africa dependent had instead driven us to independence. The isolation designed to punish us had shielded our innovation from foreign interference. Netanyahu's Operation ArcNet had indeed built a vast network across Africa, just not the kind he imagined. Instead of a web of control, we created a web of cooperation. Instead of tools for surveillance, we built systems for sovereignty. 1 year after the attacks, I received an encrypted message from Tel Aviv, not from officials or spies, but from a group calling itself Israeli Engineers for Digital Justice. Captain Traoré. It read, "We are the programmers who built the systems used against your country. We apologize, and we want to help dismantle what we helped create." Enclosed are technical documents detailing surveillance operations across Africa. We also provide countermeasures, tools to secure your infrastructure and eliminate hidden access points. Use them to make Africa truly cyber-sovereign. Attached were blueprints of backdoors in banking software, vulnerabilities in government servers, secret entry points buried deep in telecom infrastructure, and, most importantly, source code for shutting them down. I shared the intelligence with our partners. Within months, African cybersecurity teams wiped away decades of embedded surveillance. Government networks were fortified. Banking systems secured. Communications liberated. For the first time since the birth of the internet, an entire continent stood digitally free. The transformation was undeniable. European intelligence agencies found themselves locked out of African systems. American corporations were blocked from harvesting African user data. Israeli contractors, once dominant, were told politely but firmly, "Africa builds its own security now." The hunters had become the hunted. The colonizers had been decolonized. The watchers had lost the power to watch. Today, when I speak to young Africans about that morning, when our servers first went dark, they struggle to understand the fear it caused. They live in a world where African technology doesn't just survive, it leads. Where delegations from Europe and Asia arrive in Ouagadougou, Nairobi, and Accra to study our digital sovereignty model. They ask questions that reveal how much the world has shifted. Why did we ever let foreigners control our communications? How could we have stored our data in their countries? Why didn't we build our own internet from the beginning? I tell them this: the world they inherited was not the one we were born into. The digital freedom they now take for granted was purchased by leaders who refused to bow, engineers who chose conscience over contracts, and people who decided sovereignty was worth any cost. The cyberattacks of August 28, 2025, were meant to teach Africa the cost of defiance. Instead, they revealed the price of dependence. They were designed to drag us back into digital colonialism. Instead, they hurled us forward into digital liberation. That morning, when our servers fell silent, we learned the truth. We didn't need their systems nearly as much as they needed our compliance. And the day they tried to isolate us, we discovered the most powerful lesson of all. Africa could connect to itself, directly. The global response was predictable. Western think tanks churned out alarmed reports about African technological nationalism. Intelligence agencies warned of digital balkanization and the dangerous precedent of regional internet systems. Tech executives testified before Congress, insisting Africa's actions threatened global connectivity. But there was something they couldn't undo: the demonstration effect. If Africans could build technology that was faster, safer, and more ethical than Silicon Valley's, then what did that say about American supremacy? Other regions took notice. Latin American countries began constructing interregional networks. Southeast Asian nations launched their own social platforms. European privacy advocates pushed harder for independence from U.S. surveillance capitalism. The digital world was decolonizing. The irony was sharp. The cyberattacks meant to keep Africa dependent had instead driven us to independence. The isolation designed to punish us had shielded our innovation from foreign interference. Netanyahu's Operation ArcNet had indeed built a vast network across Africa, just not the kind he imagined. Instead of a web of control, we created a web of cooperation. Instead of tools for surveillance, we built systems for sovereignty. 1 year after the attacks, I received an encrypted message from Tel Aviv, not from officials or spies, but from a group calling itself Israeli Engineers for Digital Justice. Captain Traoré, it read, "We are the programmers who built the systems used against your country. We apologize, and we want to help dismantle what we helped create." Enclosed are technical documents detailing surveillance operations across Africa. We also provide countermeasures, tools to secure your infrastructure and eliminate hidden access points. Use them to make Africa truly cyber sovereign. Attached were blueprints of backdoors in banking software, vulnerabilities in government servers, secret entry points buried deep in telecom infrastructure, and, most importantly, source code for shutting them down. I shared the intelligence with our partners. Within months, African cybersecurity teams wiped away decades of embedded surveillance. Government networks were fortified. Banking systems secured. Communications liberated. For the first time since the birth of the internet, an entire continent stood digitally free. The transformation was undeniable. European intelligence agencies found themselves locked out of African systems. American corporations were blocked from harvesting African user data. Israeli contractors, once dominant, were told politely but firmly, Africa builds its own security now. The hunters had become the hunted. The colonizers had been decolonized. The watchers had lost the power to watch. Today, when I speak to young Africans about that morning, when our servers first went dark, they struggle to understand the fear it caused. They live in a world where African technology doesn't just survive, it leads, where delegations from Europe and Asia arrive in Ouagadougou, Nairobi, and Accra to study our digital sovereignty model. They ask questions that reveal how much the world has shifted. Why did we ever let foreigners control our communications? How could we have stored our data in their countries? Why didn't we build our own internet from the beginning? I tell them this: the world they inherited was not the one we were born into. The digital freedom they now take for granted was purchased by leaders who refused to bow, engineers who chose conscience over contracts, and people who decided sovereignty was worth any cost. The cyberattacks of August 28, 2025, were meant to teach Africa the cost of defiance. Instead, they revealed the price of dependence. They were designed to drag us back into digital colonialism. Instead, they hurled us forward into digital liberation. That morning, when our servers fell silent, we learned the truth. We didn't need their systems nearly as much as they needed our compliance. And the day they tried to isolate us, we discovered the most powerful lesson of all. Africa could connect to itself. Directly. The moment they tried to control us through technology, we realized we could command our own technological destiny. That is the lesson for every nation, every people, every generation to come. Independence is never given, it is seized. Sovereignty is never granted, it is claimed. Freedom is never donated, it is built. They did not drop bombs on Burkina Faso that August morning. Instead, they dropped their guard. They revealed their methods, exposed their networks, and showed us exactly how to design systems they could never penetrate. In their attempt to make us fear their power, they taught us how to overcome it. In trying to prove our weakness, they forced us to discover our strength. In seeking to block our independence, they made our liberation unstoppable. The servers that went dark that morning came back online, stronger, unbreakable, and beyond their reach. The energy grid that flickered now runs on African-built smart systems no foreign hacker can touch. The banks they froze now operate on continental networks no outsider can control. We gained more than technological independence. We achieved technological superiority. We secured more than cyber sovereignty. We built cyber supremacy, and all because they wanted to teach us that resistance was futile. Instead, they proved that resistance was the only road to freedom. Country or death, that was the choice they forced on us. And in choosing, we discovered something greater: country and life. Sovereignty and prosperity, independence and innovation. So the question is no longer if you will choose. The only question is, when you do, will you choose dignity or dependency? Will you rise to your full stature or remain small by design? Today, the servers hum, the networks hold, the continent is connected, and we are free. Forever free.